Aeroplex since 1979 and who has worked as track superintendent at Del Mar since 1989. Dennis Moore is primarily involved with Hollywood Park, both dirt and recently cushion track, but he's been with a range of other tracks, including Ruidoso, Zia, and Albuquerque. We have Butch Lear, who is the longtime track superintendent at Churchill Downs. Mike Young, who has worked for 30 years at Keeneland and is the track and groom superintendent. And again, Mr. Richard Tedesco, who's the track superintendent at Santa Anita. And again, Dr. Peterson, professor of mechanical engineering in the University of Maine, who specializes in the testing of racetrack surfaces and who had made a presentation earlier. I'd like to turn it over now to Mr. Richard Shapiro.
Thank you. As everybody knows, and I found it very interesting in the earlier sessions today, one of the things that we seem to all be focused on very much so is synthetic tracks. The California Horse Racing Board certainly has adopted that approach. And I want to share with you, I think, where we came from. Excuse me. I think that what we looked at is that if we were all in a business school, we have a business problem. And the business problem we have is that we have a business that, frankly, has been in decline. We have competition from sources like racinos and Indian gaming. We have now the internet. We have a lot of traffic. We have a lot of challenges. And we also are threatened with losing some of our racetracks. Well, out in California, we certainly have been at the forefront of all of those issues. We also had to look at our own product. And in California, we looked at, well, what were we putting on the racetrack? And as you've heard today and in the prior sessions, which are really fascinating, we seem to have a deteriorating product. Now, that is what we're putting on the racetrack, because we're putting fewer horses into every race, and those horses aren't lasting. They're not able to get as many starts, and their careers are much shorter. And here we sit in this form, and frankly, as I was sitting here, I was saying, wow, you know, I've never been in this building. But this is the building where a horse for $16 million was sold, and we see horses sold for millions of dollars all the time, and everybody just, it's become matter of fact to some degree. So when our racing board took the initiative to say, well, what can we do? What can we do to try and fix this business problem? Well, we can't instill better horsemanship into trainers, and we can't breed better owners. And the industry is really turned into a breeding business where we have lots of great students of pedigrees that are breeding the best thoroughbreds, but for some reason, they're more fragile. So what can we do? Well, one thing we could do is we could look at where we were racing, how often we're racing, and what we're racing on. And it was only about 3.5 years ago that Craig Fravel actually was the one. I was here in Kentucky, and Craig said to me, listen, I want you to come over to Keeneland and see this stuff they put out there. It's a new thing, it's a new track. And I was blown away by it. And I saw it, and I ran into a few horsemen that I knew, and I said, well, what do you think of it? And one who is not what I would call the most jovial guy that you're gonna go out and have a beer with, Bobby Frankel. He says to me, he says, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. This is amazing. So then I went out on the track, and it was truly amazing because you didn't hear the horses going by. You didn't hear the concussion. So we got into it. And in California, we held a series of informational seminars. We invited all of the vendors out to show what they had. And we got to where we did a lot of studies. We did health studies. We did toxicology studies. We did lots of studies. And what we found was this was a step that we in California could take to try and change our image of being a hard-footed racetracks, and a way to improve our business, a way to try to turn the corner of our business. So we did this. And what have the results been so far? Well, what we know is everybody's interested in track surfaces. That's a good thing, because we're doing something. We also have seen that at every place there's been a race meeting that's had a synthetic surface, our field size has grown. We've seen that we have more horses available to race and more horses in the barn area. We've seen that handle's gone up every place that we've had a synthetic track so far. Now, that has not come without problems. And certainly this year, as we've all have witnessed what's gone on at Santa Anita, it's come with a lot of angst, a lot of criticism, and a lot of challenges. And so the gentlemen that are sitting here in front of you are the people that are really the problem solvers, because they're the ones that got this problem put to them, and we've turned to them and we've said, okay, fix it. What do we do? And what we've learned so far, and I hope to hear from each of them, is that what we need is more study, we need more science, and we need more time. But we are on the right track, because the statistics are clear that we are doing something to improve the sport, to improve the game, and we are saving the horses. So I would like to ask each of these gentlemen if they would first tell us how many years they've worked on a dirt racetrack before they ever worked on a synthetic one. Steve, why don't you start?
I started working at Pomona in 1972 as the assistant track superintendent. In 1979, I became the superintendent, and I've been there ever since.
I'm still working on dirt tracks, but that's a big topic right now. I've been at Churchill Downs 41 years. I started out 9 years as a trackman, worked on the track. Then I was 6 years, I was the assistant under a man that I really looked up to, almost like a father. In the industry, he was known as one of the best at taking care of a dirt track. And then for 26 years, I've been at Churchill Downs after he turned the reins over to me. So,
Dennis?
I was kind of born into, my father had started Hollywood Park in 1946, and my brother and myself have been in the business all our lives, and I took the job at Los Alamitos in 1972, and between there and Hollywood have been involved as a track superintendent since 1976.
Mike?
I'm not as old as these guys, I can tell that now, but I started working here at Kingman in 78. Really got involved in racetrack probably the first month I was here in 82. Got more involved in, I think it was 91, I became track superintendent and been here since.
I started in 1964 at Hollywood Park. I got my first bit of racing by being stationed here at Fort Knox. And when I got back home, I decided I liked this business. So I went from there. I was track superintendent at Hollywood, track superintendent at Los Alamitos, and now I'm with Santa Anita.
He had dark hair before this race meeting started. Let's brought that on. So if I could just ask the people that have now worked, you've heard how many years of dirt? And Dennis, as far as I know, you were probably the first one on this panel that I know of, maybe Mike, to work with the synthetic tracks. Maybe you could tell us what your experience has been. You've got cushion track at Hollywood Park, and I know there's been some challenges, and perhaps you could tell us what you've seen and what you've learned and your view of dirt versus synthetic.
Well, I think that, I definitely think we're headed in the right direction, but I think that in the very beginning when we first installed Hollywood Park in September of '06 until we started racing in November, we virtually had no injuries, no breakdowns. It was unbelievable. I mean, the horse ambulance just sat there, which is a good thing. The first week of racing, we had 8 to 10 right hind ankle injuries, which was kind of very unusual for us, but we found out that we weren't, and Mitch Taylor had talked about this earlier. Part of the problem we felt was that we weren't getting the slide in the surface that was necessary. So we changed our maintenance program. Once we changed our maintenance and started loosening it up in the morning before training, those injuries virtually are unheard of now. So I think that what we have found out since '06, and now we're getting into our third meeting, which we've had to recondition the track last July, and we'll also be doing that before the beginning of this coming meeting, is that we really have to stay on top of this stuff, much more, I think, even than we did dirt, because I think it's more weather sensitive. And I think the changes, even though they may be ever so small, are accentuated on the synthetic, so it's more important to really get better data and get it quickly and respond quickly. And I think that as Mr. Shapiro said, you know, we found out now that we think we need more science into it, evaluating the waxes, evaluating how much change the weather does have on the surface at different times of the day. I think those are all things that are important. But as far as training, we have seen this last meet, and probably in the summer, we've seen a little more fatalities in the morning than what maybe we normally seen. That could be due to an increase in horses training on the track. I think that these tracks have not been put through the pounding that we put them through in California. I mean, in England, they don't get used up like our tracks do. You know, what we put on a track in a week might take England 10 years to do. I don't know. It's astronomical. And I think those are things that we really need to look at and really need to follow and figure out. But I think that we have to be diligent, and we cannot, I almost sound like Bush there for a minute, didn't I? Anyways, we have to stay focused on this and get the science to support it. And working with Mick Peterson, Mick's done a great job. He is now, I think, is able to give us the breakdown of the wax in relationship to what it's doing to the track and the performance of the horse. And that's the kind of stuff we need. So we need to go more with I said the next generation trackman is going to almost have to be a chemist. And I think that's kind of where we're going to have to go to. We need to get some type of petroleum engineer that deals in polymers and waxes involved to tell us that, you know, we can put an inhibitor into the material that maybe will help it. Maybe, you know, I mean, there's so many different questions that I have that some of them are stupid and maybe some of them aren't. But I mean, definitely think that we need to look into this to make these tracks better than what they are, because right now I don't think there's any one of us that have had these tracks that can honestly say that we have not had problems with them. And I don't really think that they're completely what they were sold to be as of yet, but I do think that we can get there. That's about it.
So let's ask Steve, if I can just jump over to Steve, when we're talking about problems, all right? Because, Steve, I'm sorry, not Steve. I was going to get Steve. To Richard. Richard, everyone knows that the problem at Santa Anita was that they used the wrong sand. The sand had silt in it. And that inhibited the water from draining through it, that in fact it retained the water for the most part. So could you describe what your experience was and what you saw, what you inherited and what you got, and what it is today and what made the difference? Because as Dennis was talking about science, which I think really was what played a key role there, and I think everyone would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, well, this really was a science, because we had everyone involved, Mick Peterson, the University of Southern California, every available laboratory to try to find out what our problem was. We started out with a sand that was brought in, and it had too much silt and clay. And the synthetic tracks have to be silica sand, which is a very pure sand. And what happened after a short time, our track started to get very hard on us, and we couldn't figure out what it was, so we power harrowed using the equipment that we were told to use. And as I was explaining to the other fellows here, we made one round on the racetrack and we wore an 11-inch tooth down to 5. That's how hard it was. And so we had to start making some adjustments, and then we got caught with rain. And that was our demise. We lost racing days, and Mick Peterson came in to start giving us advice, and everyone joined in, and we added a sand to it that was actually brought in by Cushion Track, another sand that was supposed to promote drainage. And Rick Shapiro, he was there on a Sunday with us. We were all trying to make this work, and that proved to be another racing surface. It turned out that I had my second racing surface. This was in less than 6 months. And we finally brought in ProRide, and they added a polymer to our track that promoted drainage. And at this point, we are now functioning very well. Our injuries are down. We've got very good comments throughout the backside, and to everyone's talking about this earlier, moisture does seem to help these racetracks, because every time we've had rain, that's the best track I've had. So I'm an advocate of adding water to these racetracks. But today we are functioning well, and we've had some good racing. Our speeds aren't too fast, and everyone's happy.
So that brings up a great point, water. Now we have 2 poly tracks here, and one poly track was told, don't put any water on the track. You have poly track. I don't know if you put water on the track. And then we have Dr. Peterson here, who did a lot of study, and perhaps you can tell us, after we hear from Steve and from Mike, what your view is about adding moisture to these tracks.
I'm Steve Wood, and I worked at Del Mar for about 18 years. The last year we put in polytrack. My job this last year was actually pretty simple. I put my ego behind me, and I didn't use very much judgment of my own. Michael Young came out and was there probably at least maybe 2/3 of the meet, and I did exactly what he told me all the time. We did the same maintenance in the morning and the afternoon, and the injuries, bone injuries were reduced significantly. And according to the vets that we visited with, it wasn't a trade-off. There weren't more bows or suspensories, so it really worked phenomenal. We were told not to water it, and we'd had such a good meet. We'd raced 40, I think we went through 42 days and only had a couple fatalities on the dirt, which was a big reduction from the year before. So we were having such good luck, we didn't want to do anything, so we didn't water it during the meet. I believe this next year, I think we're going to try to water it, and I think we're going to try, polytrack people are trying to assist us with making it a little tighter. The only problem, the only issue that we really did have was the morning changed. The morning surface was a lot tighter than the afternoon. As soon as the surface warmed up, and it didn't take a lot of warmth, the hotter it got, the slower it got. It was a couple, 3 seconds off during the afternoon. The horsemen were actually pretty good with it. You know, they all noticed it, and they all loved it in the morning. They did notice the oscillation of the times, and we got a little bit of flack over it, but I think it was so safe this year, and it was such a change that people accepted it a lot more. Michael Young and I were just talking. I think this next year they'll expect more. They'll expect it to be more similar from morning to afternoon. But for me, it worked really, really good. It was relatively simple to take care of. Everything that we did exactly what Michael Young told us. We were able to grade it once a week. We power harrowed it the last week of the meet. We did all the things that we were supposed to do to it, and it seemed to work out really good. It is very touchy, though. It was really touchy. You know, we tried different things. Martin Collins came out a couple times and wanted us to power harrow it. We tried it one time during the meet, and it didn't work out real well. It made it pretty slow, but the polytrack people for us were helpful. They were there. You could reach them. They didn't just come in and build the track and then walk away. I do believe, my own opinion, I think water would help it, and I think this year it's going to be even a better surface than it was last year. I, for one, though, am not a complete knocker of dirt tracks, because I think there's some really good dirt tracks out there. I think you have a real good dirt track, Butch, and I think there's other dirt tracks that work very well as well. I don't mean to be riding the fence, but I think I've seen some really good dirt tracks. Polytrack at this point showed me and made me a believer at Del Mar, because I'd worked there for a long time, and the injuries were really greatly reduced, and all around injuries. That's about all I have to say about it.
I'm sure glad it worked out for Steve, because I wouldn't be here if it hadn't, the way it sounds. You know, in Kentucky, we don't have much of a change in weather. It stays pretty well the same all the time. You know, we went from 2 degrees one day to 70 degrees next week, 6 inches of snow. So we've had it all, and I think there are times to water a racetrack, especially the track we've got. I can't speak for every synthetic track, but we got a spell last race meet that it got probably 90 degrees. Nick kept preaching me to water, and I finally did, and I think it made a difference. You know, us track guys, we're hard-headed too. You got to remember that, and we're learning. So, but and everybody, you know, I hear everybody talk about the difference, a synthetic track being different, changing with the weather. Believe me, and I think Butch will vouch for this. Any track will change with the weather. Dirt, synthetic, it doesn't matter. But I will tell you one thing about synthetic tracks, what I've seen. You go to bed of a night, you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's pouring down the rain. You know you're not going to have a sloppy track. You know everything's going to be okay when you go in that morning. And I think that's good for the horse and, you know, the people taking care of the track. We've missed 5 days of training this winter. 3 of them, horseback was too slick. We probably could have got up at 2 o'clock in the morning and tried to do something. The other 2 days we had 6 inches of snow, and I shut it down because it was a weekend, and I had guys come in here on Sunday, and we cleared one track and had it ready for Monday morning. But I think every climate, you got to look at the climate. Dennis is, you know, what they've got, what Steve's got. But I think you've got to look at that and decide water. I don't think you can just say water is better for a poly track, because if it's 60 degrees, you don't want to put water on the track we've got. I can tell you that. And if it's 90 degrees, it doesn't hurt. And we do have the water where we can do that. So, but I'm a big believer in synthetic tracks. And we'll just, you know, we need all the help we can get, and I think we're all learning, so we'll leave it at that.
So Bick, I'm a horseman, okay? And I want to know that I'm going to have a consistent track. One of the gripes that you hear is that they don't know what they drive in the barn area, they don't know what they're driving into. So what do we do? I mean, you saw Del Mar, you've seen all these, of what the situation was, different track in the morning, different track in the afternoon. What do we do?
Well, I think the best way to start out is to talk about Dennis and Mike and Steve, how they learned and how much time they had on dirt tracks before they got started being responsible for these tracks. We had a huge amount of experience with the dirt track, and when somebody had come in the morning, they'd know from experience or from talking to somebody. They had people here who'd been working this job 20, 30 years, and if they weren't there, even Steve can just call the retired superintendent at Del Mar, who comes by in the afternoon and can't stay away because he spent so long. We had a lot of experiential science that went behind the dirt tracks. With the synthetic tracks, you've got about all of it in the United States sitting up here right in front of you right now. The other thing about the synthetic tracks is we've got more variables. You came into a dirt track, you knew that you had organics, you had the clay. There's some things that were being done based on experience that were, so far, I mean, my job on the dirt surfaces was figuring out why people were doing it, because usually it was based on good judgment and experience. If you put some science behind it, you could help narrow the range of the variation. With synthetics, we've got none of that. And so when Mr. Shapiro says, you know, we've got this information, we can separate out the moisture and the temperature, I can't do that at this point. We haven't even built the tests at this point to be able to say how do we separate out the effect of temperature and moisture. What surprised me is when we came into the synthetic tracks, I assumed that what we were going to see was an elimination of the sensitivity to moisture and an introduction of a sensitivity to temperature. That was based just on the use of waxes and polymers where we were near the melt point, or at least the glass transition point, even on some of these fibers that we're using. However, what we've seen is, as these synthetic tracks evolve, they end up being sensitive to moisture as well. So what we started out with was 4 or 5 variables that we worked with on dirt tracks that were pretty reliable you could come into a fairgrounds and have a pretty good chance of knowing what you were going to get, and it didn't matter whether it was Fresno Fair or Churchill Downs. You know, I mean, an entity had its reputation, and it had its surface, and it had its experience. With synthetics, we've got a very different situation where we're now looking at having to adapt the surface to conditions that we didn't see in the past. And so what we need to do is we need to understand more about these variables. It's going to take some investment, and it's going to take some time. In the meantime, the challenge is Mike and Dennis and Steve and Rich, these guys have to take care of these day to day. So what I've been trying to do is give them all the information as we go along. It's incomplete information, but at least it helps them make the decisions. Day to day, they still have to keep the track up and running. So I tried to tell them, well, look, you better try water because it looks like it matters more than I told you last week because we ran a series of tests. And that's what I did to Dennis today. I mean, I showed up here today, last night, and I gave him, I said, look, I don't know what this means, but there's a couple more things you better try before you go any further. That's where we're at right now. We need to become more systematic, though, because this is a complex problem.
That's not mine. That goes there. Butch, you haven't meant to ignore you. You haven't worked on one of these tracks yet, as I understand it. Okay? So when's the Derby switching to synthetic?
That's why I'm here. No, actually, these guys that's on this table right here, I think they'll tell you all through this whole process, you know, I've been in touch with these guys, and I will say Dennis, he was involved with Equitrack. If everybody remember, it was going to change, and everybody said it was ahead of its time, and I believe it was. I really think what everybody in this room is doing for the better of horse racing. I've never been against a synthetic surface. We have so much tradition at Churchill Downs that, you know, I want to put what's best for Church. It wouldn't be my decision anyway. It would be our horsemen with the management of Churchill Downs. And we're certainly looking at all these things that's come up with synthetic surfaces. We're not against them. I'm not against them. I just think that we're on the right direction. You know, I worked with Dr. George Pratt. I don't know if a lot of you all remember. I know Pam's out there. She remembers Dr. Pratt. He did a lot. We tried to get a standard on dirt track surfaces, which it never happened. You could never get everybody to agree on what is best, but it's certainly the best interest of the horse, which we all try to, I know me and my staff are dedicated to. It's very interesting what I saw here today with horseshoes and those kind of issues, medication. We can all start throwing rocks at each other, but the truth of the matter is we got to work together on it. And I'm here for Churchill Downs because we're dedicated to that. And I know that, like they said, there's a lot of expertise at this table that I've dealt with for a number of years. And I told Steve, we're kind of a dying breed. Nobody's wanting to come up and take over our jobs unless it could be chemists and engineers and those kind of people may be out there in the future.
Frankly, I think it's a combination. I've known Rich and Dennis probably, well, I knew your father, and I mean, we go back 35 years, right? And you worked for his father, and it seems that the track man is the guy who, frankly, in my opinion, has the most demanding job on the racetrack. I mean, they're up in the wee hours of the morning and the night and out there all day, and it's tough, and then you have to please the horsemen, and you get to hear the complaints all the time. So what is it that, if we could go down the road with each person and say, what is it that we really need to do? I mean, do we need to find a way that all the track people can have more of a discussion? Should we be using the internet? If this is problem I'm encountering, this is a problem that I'm finding. Because what we've learned out, at least in the discussions that we had in California, is that we do need to now meld science with the track man who's actually working the track. And I know that we used the lab at USC and Dr. Burdett, and there's other scientists. How can we incorporate this in your minds so that we can give you the best tools? And what about the tools you use? I mean, conventional tractors. I mean, I know there's Gallop Masters and other equipment for synthetic tracks. Are there other things that we need to be developing in your mind? Any thoughts on that, Steve, or anybody?
The science part, the part that Mick adds to it, and I don't know the man from USC, but I know we work directly with Matkin, and the science part of it is essential. I mean, it's really essential. We're just regular dirt people up here, and without any disrespect, we're all pretty much dummies. We're good at what we do, but that's about as far as it goes. We all know how to take care of dirt really well. We're going into a new era now, and this is an era where we need the scientific values that Mick and other people can offer us. Symposiums and seminars. Craig Fravel is my boss, and he's pretty bright, and he also recommended that we have a symposium every couple months. You don't know how beneficial this is when I can sit down with Mike or Dennis or Butch and Rich Tedesco, and we can say, well, Mike Young's going to take us out today and show us a reverse rototiller that he's found that seems to work. We learned, Michael was telling me about some tires that Chicago used last year, and I think we're going to try them this year at Del Mar. Those are beneficial things. Those are really hugely beneficial, because if we don't share knowledge with each other, where are we going to get it? The manufacturer has done a good job in developing the product. And with all due respect, the manufacturer doesn't have the expertise to how to take care of these, especially on the West Coast, because of the traffic that we get. And he's not going to be real helpful in the maintenance. And when you get in a problem, he's not going to be around to help you through it. We will be around as a group more, and that would probably put us it helps us eliminate. I'm not going to make the mistakes Mike had to make and Dennis had to make, because I'm going to learn from him and not go down that road. But the science part of this, for me, I always noticed that my track, when I put bark in, would be really exceptional for quite a while, and then it would start to tail off. The bark would start to hurt me in a regard, because it would start to hold the moisture, and it would start to react like clay. And those are things that you could feel, and you knew was happening because you could tell by the way the hair was going through it. With the synthetic surfaces, we don't have that feel. We don't have that knowledge that is going to kind of get us through areas like that. So Mick Peterson and scientists and people like that are going to be able to test the material. That's my biggest fear, is the track may be really good today, but as the wax starts to wear off or the fiber starts to deteriorate, it's not going to be as good. And naturally, the horsemen, and rightfully so, are going to blame one of us. They're going to say, well, we're not doing it right, we're sabotaging it, we're not smart enough to keep up with it. And it's actually the material changing. And as of now, I don't think we have a test that'll bear that out. We will never know. So for me, that would be the biggest thing we could do.
Okay. And so what about going to Encompass and seeing if, or something like that, to where there's a database that you can all plug into that says we re-waxed our track after so many days, or every 6 months we did this and we did that, so that could be used as a guide. Even though the tracks are all different, they're all somewhat similar. They're just different manufacturers, and they're all 80% silica sand and everything else. Would that be helpful if there was a database?
I'll take that. That's really one of the things that on the Surfaces Committee that we're gradually moving towards, we're discussing. And some of the tracks have already begun this process. I use Turfway as the example because they actually had the most populated spreadsheet that I saw. And really, I think this is an excellent idea, is this maintenance documentation, because it's an easier way to share lessons as we move forward. It's difficult at this point because even the dirt track maintenance wasn't particularly standardized, and there were clearly geographical differences. I think those geographical differences are justified, and the challenge is we may end up with other justified differences on the synthetic tracks where you have to care for them somewhat differently based on where you're at and the climate you're facing.
Mick came in, I think it's December the 21st, and did a test on our track. We found out that know, we was getting a little bit of a compaction right off the rail. I don't think we had it during the summer, but we did have it in the winter, and it was showing up. So, you know, we went ahead and ordered some wide tires to put on the tractor. I think that's going to help. But I do think we've got to count on people to, you know, to test stuff for us, because, you know, we can go out here and do the work, but doing the testing, we need people like Mick to do it. And all of us sitting here, we make a point to call each other and talk. I've talked to Dennis, I talked to Butch, Steve, Richard. We're always talking to each other. Even when we had dirt, you know, none of us got a big ego, so we'll listen to the other and learn from it. And I think that's what it's going to take. The hard part now is we don't have enough people here to, you know, involved in synthetic tracks to really. I wish there was 20 more. That way we could get better ideas. And when we was talking about start having a meeting with the track superintendents, I tell you, the important people we've got, the guys that's working for us on the track, they need to be involved, because you got to listen to them when they're out there every day. When we first put the poly track in, I think everybody that works at Kingland knows I got a little selfish. I wouldn't let anybody else on it. I stayed on it myself. You know, I just wanted to know what was going on. And now we've got these guys working on it every day. We can go out and we can stick a probe in it, or we can measure it. We can do this and that, but we need those guys to come to us and talk to them and find out what's going on. And I think in the meetings, they would be important to, you know, you might just have a couple key guys, but you need to have them involved in it. And I think that's what it's going to take.
All right, if anybody's going to want to ask a question, I think there's a couple of cards that you can turn in cards. I'd like to ask, before I get to the questions, one last question of each of the people. There's a new racetrack that's being built. They come to you and they say, we need a new racetrack. We need you to put in a surface. What would you put in? Would you put in a sandy loam racetrack, dirt? Would you put in a poly track or a synthetic track? What would you do? You guys have been in this business forever. You've seen it all.
From what I've seen, and I've been dealing with synthetics and dirt all these years, I've noticed that there's a big difference in injuries. Just like Rich said earlier, our fields are bigger. Everything is happening for the good of the industry. I'd go synthetic again.
Sure ain't nothing to change my mind, synthetic.
Well, I've experienced both the good and the bad of synthetic, and I think you'd have to look at the factors. I think the important thing is that we still have a ways to go before we get these tracks where we thought they were going to be. I don't think they're quite where we thought they were going to be at yet, and I think part of the thing, one thing that, how can I phrase it? We should, it's kind of like the manufacturer. It's like you have a child and you know he's a very bad child, but you don't want anybody telling you that. And I think that's kind of where we're at with the manufacturers. I mean, they started this process, and it's a great thing, and they got it rolling. But for us to step in and now and tell them that, you know, here, we've got some problems, we need to correct these problems, it's going to be difficult for them to accept that. So we have to get beyond that by bringing in the scientists and the outside people that we feel to take this to the next step.
Well, what I would do is try to get the biggest group of people together that deal with these issues and make such as a forum like this. But the first thing I'd do is make sure there wasn't a bean counter in there, in that group. And then I'd really try to put a roof over it, because the weather's what's always it's been a factor in what we do, and even in the synthetic tracks. But, you know, I think, you know, I'm partial to Churchill Downs. I'm partial to the dirt track we have there. But I'm not against change. But I think, you know, like I say, with a whole bunch of people's input and non-biased input is what we need. And then I think we could make a decision on what's best for the horses. But I think it's, in my situation, I think it's a little too soon. But that's just the way I feel about it.
That's fair.
I'm not against all dirt tracks, but today, I think the potential for synthetic surfaces is probably greater than dirt tracks. Just from what I've seen, you know, it's pretty much convinced me that potentially it has the right to save a lot of horses.
Dr. Science?
Well, I guess my quick question was going to be to ask how much money you have.
You know
Because-
what?
and-
You know what?
and that's
If
just
they can
the-
sell the horses in this building that they sell for all those millions, everybody, let's say money's not the object.
Well, I mean, it's just the opposite sort of what Butch was saying, though, because I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind in this whole conversation is the importance of the smaller dirt tracks overall to the industry. And there's always going to be a diversity of surfaces. And if you were putting in a new track, one thing that's absolutely critical and that was needed prior to the whole synthetic movement was an improvement in the base structure. And putting in a good base, regardless of what your surface is, will get you a significant gain on the tracks. And that's a problem that exists in existing tracks, and it's a problem when new tracks are put in. After that, then the question you'd have to ask is what you can afford to maintain and what the experience base is of the people who are going to be running it.
Okay. I thank everybody here. I'm going to ask some of the questions that have been submitted. To Mike Young, have you seen a big difference in condition and ease of maintenance on the training track, first generation polytrack, and the main track, second generation polytrack?
I've seen, you know, I don't think it's, I guess it has been a big difference because, you know, it's a learning. I mean, when we started out, I think we had a little bit of a, in the wintertime, the track sticking to horses' feet and stuff, and I don't think we have that now. So I think the training track is maybe, you know, a lot of them that trains on it, they really like the training track better than the main track, but you know, that's the way it's always been. You know, if you're training on one, they want it looser, maybe a little deeper. But for it, yes, being easier to take care of, I've seen it. You know, it's when you first start out on these things, you're scared to death you're going to get into a base. There are things you're not going to try because, you know, you go down and start mixing it and start loosening it up, and you're worried, you know, you're going to get into the blacktop underneath it or the, you know, bring rock up. So I think the more you work with it, the more comfortable you feel with it. So I think it's, you know, even a lot easier. The main track, you know, I was telling, I think Steve a while ago, and it's like that with any racetrack. I think the longer it's down, the more experts you have telling you what to do, so it makes it a little tougher, but I think that's part of it.
Thank you. The two people turned in questions very similar. So, should banking angles be different on synthetic versus dirt? And I know that they are different depending on the track. I don't know what you, maybe in answering, if anybody wants to answer this question, you can say what the angle is at the apex of your turns. But should banking angles? Dennis?
Well, at Hollywood, we chose to stay with the same grades that we'd had on our dirt track. So we still have the 5.5% in our turns and the 3%.
And Richard, what do you have at Santa Anita?
We at Santa Anita, we have 5% on the turns and less than 1%, 0.8% on the straights, which when they first installed it was good, but when I went through all these different problems, I tried to promote drainage, surface drainage, and I couldn't. So I changed that to 2, and then we went back to 1. So that's where we're at now.
Okay. Mike, what is?
We have 4 in the turns, and we're flat in the stretch. And something I wanted to bring up, I talked to some of these guys, I'm not sure I told everybody. You know, when the synthetic track was put in, I think a lot of people got the impression that it wouldn't move. And we all know anything will move if you get the right weather. So something I've started doing, and I started doing it in, I don't remember the first time, November or December, but when they put this track in, they put, you know, in with a GPS system. So I said, why should we try to grade it guessing? And so I've had it graded about every 3 months. I've started in, I think, November, December, and I just had it done again. And I had the guys come in with a GPS system, and it took all the guesswork out of it and did a great job. And I just wanted to say that, make sure I get, you know, to everybody here that so they'll know it.
This is a question to Richard Tedesco. Does the polymer added by ProRide break down like wax? And if not, why not only use a polymer-based synthetic surface? So the question is, I think, really,
Well, we're really relatively young working with the polymers. We've only had it in for a couple of months, so I can't really answer that as far as breakdown. I know that the wax broke down very quickly when we first installed it with a cushion track, and I was telling the rest of these fellas here that we have a stockpile that we never touched, and that wax disappeared on its own. So I can't answer that about polymers, but so far I'm having terrific luck with it.
here's a question that's not aimed at anyone, but I think is a great question, frankly. And that is, how close is the racetrack that you now have compared to the one that you put in originally, composition-wise? How often? I think it gets to the maintenance issue, and I think that what we found in California was that the key issue is that's great that Tapeta and Polytrack and Cushion Track and whoever else sells us these tracks, but it's maintenance at this point. It's maintenance is the key. So you said that you're going to have to renovate your track, or you have already. What's involved in that? How long does that take? Maybe how costly is it? And how often?
Well, right now, it seems like we're on a pattern of every 7 months rejuvenating, re-waxing.
What does that mean, rejuvenate?
To put more wax into it and to get it back to where the original design was at. Through mixed latest tests, we see now that we're low in wax again, which we suspected, so we'll be re-waxing before the meet. The one problem that we're having right now that we can't really tell through testing is how much fiber and rubber we have lost. There's no real way of determining that test, so that's something that we're looking into doing also, is by we're going to be adding some rubber and fiber along with the wax this time.
How do you lose rubber?
It gets carried off from the equipment, horses, just general traffic.
Really?
You know, I mean, we get a lot of it kicked up over the rails. We've lost a lot of it that way. We've got a lot of it carried off from tractors and harrows and everything else.
Yeah, and I can follow up with what Dennis said too. I mean, there are potential for methods to be able to separate out the rubber and fiber, because we have different densities, and you know, these could be developed. But again, this is one of these open questions. We've gotten as far as the wax, but by using the different density of the sand and the rubber and the fibers, there's potential to separate these out in a column and do this. But this is just the sort of investment that's critical to the next stage of this. Polytrack was actually the one that supported the work that we're getting pretty good now, except being able to separate out the wax composition on the tracks, which I think is critically important because there seems to be some migration of the wax through the surface over time.
We have a bunch more questions, but I'm being told that it's time to wrap it up, so we're going to wrap this up. But these questions will not go to waste. They will be given and they will be answered and addressed in the next session. I personally would like to thank each of the people here. I think somebody said that you do have the brightest minds in track maintenance that are sitting here probably in the country. And I personally would like to thank everybody who's paying attention to this issue. Whether you are a firm believer in dirt or a new believer in synthetics, we are moving in a direction which is to help the industry, to help the horse, to revive our business. And it's a way to address a business problem, which is all that we're trying to do. And while we may succeed and we may fail at times, we're making progress a step at a time. So I want to thank everybody here. I think it's been a very good discussion, and thank you very much.
I'd like to echo my thanks and admiration for the people who are track superintendents. Some years ago, I had what I thought was a bright idea of getting a soil engineer from the highway business to come and talk about it, and I thought surely those guys would have such expertise that